to a sheet of paper. Oh, here it is.
Anji, namaste.
Namaskar, good evening. Sorry for the inconvenience due to some network
Today
issues.
is the other program.
Sivi sir.
Tomorrow is your program. Today is speech program. Tomorrow is your program. Yeah. 22nd. Today is 21st. Today is it. Today is International Peace Day program is going on. It is there, but your program is on 22nd. That is the Gandhi कपड़ा बदलने का जो तारीख है वो yes वो उसी में आपको हमने रिक्वेस्ट किए.
Hello.
Sir, can you start? Sorry, due to some network issues.
You can start.
Yeah. Sorry, I mean it got delayed for 15 minutes on the technical part. I apologize and I regret for the inconvenience. I welcome you all. Good afternoon, namaste, namaskar, and Jai Jagat. I welcome you all for the national webinar on International Day of Peace and a round table on Afghanistan and global peace, organized by Sevagram Ashram Pratishthan, Wardha, Maharashtra, and Mahatma Gandhi Mission University, Aurangabad, in association with Center for Gandhian Studies, Central University of Kerala. I would request Dr. CBK Joseph, Director, Sri Jamanlal Bajaj Memorial Library and Research Center, Sevagrama Ashram Pratishthan, Wardha, to give a brief introduction about the program, as well as introduce all the keynote speakers and resource person and all the dignitaries today's program.
At the outset, I welcome all of you to the national webinar we organize on the occasion of International Day of Peace. And along with that, we are organizing a roundtable on Afghanistan and global peace. Building lasting peace has been a major concern of international organizations like the United Nations and governments all over the globe. Sustainable peace is considered as an essential prerequisite for the exercise of fundamental duties and rights of individuals. Only such a peace can ensure the citizens to lead a life enriched with values of justice, freedom, equality, solidarity, sharing, and togetherness. Human beings' quest for peace has prompted the United Nations and similar bodies to devote specific days for the promotion of peace and nonviolence. The observance of International Day of Peace by the United Nations is an effort on the part of the organization to remind humanity the significance of peace and accelerate the peace initiatives for ensuring lasting peace and security. The International Day of Peace was established by the United Nations General Assembly through a resolution in 1981, coinciding with its opening session of General Assembly, which was held annually on the third Tuesday of September. The first Peace Day was observed in September 1982. It was held on the third Tuesday of September each year up to 2001. The General Assembly of the United Nations decided in 2001 that International Day of Peace should be annually observed on September 21, starting from 2002 onwards. In the said resolution, the General Assembly declared that the day should be observed as a day of global ceasefire and non-violence. It called upon all nations and people to honor the cessation of hostilities for the duration of the day. The observance of the International Day of Peace starts with the ringing of United Nations Peace Bell at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The bell is made from coins donated by children from all continents except Africa. It was a gift from the United Nations Association of Japan to the UN as a reminder of human cost of war. It bears the inscription the International Day of Peace from the year 2014. The theme at that time was Right to Peace. And I have been reflecting on these subjects till 2021. And in 2017, my nephew passed away, Mr. Christy Matthew Philip was a student, and I am dedicating this day in his memory too. This year we have a very important topic in the midst of COVID pandemic. The last year, the theme was Shaping Peace Together, and this year, Recovering Better for an Equitable and Sustainable World. Dr. John Chelladure, Professor and Head of Department of Gandhian Studies, Mahatma Gandhi Mission University, Aurangabad, will be introducing the theme of this year. John is a specialist in conflict and peace studies. His specialization is in peacemaking. From Peace Research Center, Gujarat Vidyapeeth. And he was responsible for the starting of the commune, and he served as the director of India Peace Center Nagpur from the year 2003 to 2012. Till recently, he was serving as the Dean of Gandhi Research Foundation, Jalgaon. This brief introduction. Now I request Professor John Chelladure to address the audience. Thank you.
Dear friends, greetings. It's a pleasure meeting all of you at Sevagram Ashram Pratishthan and Mahatma Gandhi Mission University Aurangabad in association with Central University of Kerala Center of Gandhian Studies together organized this gathering, and we are happy that quite a few people have joined. This year, the International Peace Day is dedicated for a particular theme on recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world.
That is ID. Meeting ID and meeting password are different.
Deshpande ji, kindly put off your mic, mute your mic. We hear you talking on the side. Thank you. Recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world. It's a wonderful, very pertinent theme of the time. As we know, we have all been struggling to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And at this particular time, at many parts of the world, there are smaller conflicts going on, and the UN was so concerned that people who are caught in the conflict situation would not only be able to echo their life on account of conflict. And more importantly, they will not be able to get access to the vaccination without which they are susceptible to the pandemic. And on that ground, they call the human community to stop the local conflicts wherever possible. If by stopping we can help our people, that would be the best way we can serve the cause of peace. That is the idea. That is a wonderful, noble cause. Having said it, I have two points to brought. One is from the point of view of COVID. Second, from the point of view of sustainability. We need to ensure that together we serve humanity by to come out of this pandemic. And that is one of the greatest challenges, in which the immediate prescription from the global community, particularly the state, was let us have a social distance. The immediate concern is that you keep yourself away from the possible infection. Probably it was well-intended prescription, but not a thoughtful one when the term was coined. In Indian context, we have already been victims of social distancing. The discrimination, social discrimination that has been well set in the Indian tradition has already caused a lot of havoc. At this juncture, probably the prescription should have been something of a safe distancing or a careful neighborhood, something of that kind, instead of social distancing. What happened when we called for social distancing? We distanced ourselves from the rest of the community so thoroughly, so recklessly, that quite a lot of people who could have been, whose life could have been saved, lost their life because there was no social care, social walk. The innumerable people, the migrant laborers who had to walk all the way, were to walk on account of our social distancing, or we observing social distance in letter and spirit. In Indian context, probably that should not have been the thing. If we want a better recovery, better for an equitable world order, then not social distancing, safe distancing, optimum distancing, that also means optimum nearness. No more, no less distance. I mean, infection calls for maintaining a distance, but not unlimited distance. We emotionally, attitudinally distanced ourselves from our people, even our own fellow beings. This is one point I would like to say if we want to have a better recovery. Second, the sustainable world requires a different approach. The local conflicts need to be stopped so that the community will be able to recover. That is the point. Now, right from Gandhi's time, the world could not understand the real foundation of sustainable peace. We continue to, the global community continues to believe that the political peace, the peace through the army was the only essential peace consideration. That is why they call for cessation of local conflicts. I mean, it is a good intention, but that is not sufficient. The major problem lies, the major impediment for sustainable world lies in not the political conflict, but in the economic disparities or the structural violence that we have allowed to grow in the name of democratic institutions. So, I mean, even during Gandhi, that was what he was talking about, that is, let us build human community by empowering individuals to be the stakeholders of each other's life, contributors for the life of one another. That kind of neighborhood sustenance was something that Gandhi was prescribing. The Sarvodaya order, the Swadeshi economy, or decentralized arrangements in political and industrial sector. That was not at all understood by the people of that time across the globe. It appears even today they did not understand. Poverty, unemployment, or economic inequality are the worst conflicts. Worst conflicts. They are a kind of depleted conflict situation, widespread, so it is not visible, but that is the most haunting conflict that we have been facing. So cessation of conflict for recovery is a good idea in the connotation the UN has given, that is the political conflict or the violent physical physical instrumental conflicts. That is right. But cessation of the other conflicts, economic and inequality, social discrimination, that have to be stopped, towards which we need to tune our attitude, our objectivity, both at the individual level and at the national and global level. That is what occurs to me. If we do that, then probably we will do a great service to the theme that we have adopted for ourselves to celebrate the International Day of Peace this year. That is recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world. That is what occurs to me. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity.
Thank you, Professor John. When we are celebrating the International Day of Peace, we cannot think about it without having a reference to the situation and the recent developments in the Afghanistan. Therefore, as a part of the observation of International Day of Peace, we thought it would be appropriate to have a roundtable discussion on Afghanistan and world peace. Here in our midst, we have two very eminent speakers. First one is Mulakat Stephen John, Professor, Department of International Relations and Political Science, Central University of Kerala. He will be discussing with us the prospects of peace in the Taliban era. And we have another distinguished personality, Mark Linley, who is currently the Professor of Eminence, Mahatma Gandhi Mission University, Aurangabad. He will be discussing with us Afghan war, an episode in the cultural history of USA, especially in the context of global peace. I think a brief introduction about the keynote speaker is in order. Professor John Mulakat served as the Professor and Director of Gandhian Thought and Development Studies. He was the first inaugural Gandhi Luthli Chair Professor in University Council in Natal, Durban, South Africa, and he later served as professor in IIT Madras. He has many awards and recognitions. He was a recipient of Commonwealth Fellowship, Commonwealth Scholarship, Fulbright
नहीं हम कल लेते आएंगे
lecture, and so on.
नहीं तो ऐसे
He is currently
ईमेल तो है नहीं
serving as the editor of Gandhi Marg, New Delhi. He has a lot of
ये तो टाइप
publications
करना पड़ेगा
in different areas in peace studies, conflict resolution, Gandhian thought, international relations, and so on. And an expert in the field of international peace and conflict resolution. It will be quite fitting that we have Professor John in our midst to address on this very important topic, prospects for peace in the Taliban era. With this brief introduction, may I request Professor Mulakad Stephen John to address this audience to thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sibi. Dear friends, I hope you are able to hear me.
Yes.
Today is the International Peace Day. My greetings to each one of you. You know, working for the cause of peace is indeed difficult. And this is what even a Talibani fighter told a journalist. War is much easier. Now, for a nation used to the ways of war, engaging in war has become a part of the culture of Afghanistan. And we have actually historical, evidence to suggest that when people feel that some injustice has been done to them, they don't hesitate to take up this cause, take up the cause for which they stand for in a violent manner. Violence always involves suffering. And in the typical Western utilitarian notion, you should always think about ways and means by which you can minimize suffering. So there is high potential for resolving conflicts, high potential for engaging in compromises. Now, this kind of attitude may not be so pronounced with respect to the non-Western settings, particularly in the Middle East, as well as in Asia, Central Asia, and so on, including Afghanistan, where people are prepared to suffer for the cause. In other words, they embrace suffering instead of, this utilitarian notion of how we can think of reduced suffering and embrace pleasure. So I just, I'm glad that you have taken up this topic. Of course, many people in the field of international relations, they discuss this, but then the focus is more on maybe fixing up either Taliban or, trying to ensure that your country's interests are protected, and not the larger cause of peace and how this instability in the region can, have a ripple effect on many countries close to the region, as well as outside the region. As you know, Afghanistan has been in conflict for more than 4 decades. And for about half of that period, this region has been under the control of the United States. And as I said, it is a country with a lot of geographical significance. It is in a region which has 4 nuclear powers. It is in some ways it connects the Middle East to Central Asia. We also have big powers like Russia and China, who are key neighbors. So its geopolitical implications are, something which you cannot understate. Now, if you look at present-day Afghanistan, you will find that it's much more modernized and much more educated than what it was during the first Taliban era. And you'll see that the role and the profile of most women, large numbers of Afghan women have changed over the years. And you also see a huge youth bulge, young people, a lot of young people with a lot of aspirations. These are things, and there's a kind of generational shift in population. So you have to, any future regime will have to recognize these facts. If you don't do that, you are actually inviting trouble. I mean, there will be greater instability in Afghanistan in the years to come. Well, Afghanistan, if it has to live in peace and bring a certain degree of stability, it has to work with its neighboring countries, regional countries, to discourage also those countries from fomenting trouble within Afghanistan. Because these regional countries, they have ample scope for intervening in Afghanistan. Now, after 2001, the United States found that Pakistan's active support for Taliban and then providing safe havens in that country was a major stumbling block to defeating Taliban on a long-term basis. Now, this was also the experience of the Soviet Union, some 20-25 years back. So when you have another country which actually props them up and then continuously, provides them safe haven, it's difficult. I mean, we can come in, attack, and then go back. Now, the government that actually came to power after, removing the Taliban administration, with the support of the United States in 2001, they introduced a number of reforms. And we know that some success has been made, particularly in service delivery. Substantial improvement in human development in terms of indicators such as infant mortality, child mortality, life expectancy, educational attainment of not only boys, but also girls. Now, these instances of improved state capacity, unfortunately, has not been accompanied by good governance. Instead, these improvements in state capacity have been accompanied by large-scale corruption and the undermining of the very legitimacy of the so-called elected government that came to power, propped up by the United States and so on. Of course, they tried to introduce, measures like our Aadhaar system and biometrics and so on in order to bring in greater transparency. But these things are, turning out to be more useful for the Taliban fighters now to easily identify who is who and target the people who were associated with the earlier regime easily. Now, one problem with the governments, you see, the Taliban has been always speaking about, they're trying to make a distinction by saying that we are trying to create an inclusive government. So all interests of within Afghanistan will be properly accommodated within this inclusive government. This is the declared aim. And then they said that the government that we have constituted now is just a transitional government. Now, the same logic was applied by Taliban way back in 1996 when they set up the government, that this was transition. And then it continued up to 2001. So this logic actually doesn't actually work. And if you look at the people who are there in the senior leadership, you'll see that no woman has been accommodated. Although some former leaders like Karzai and Abdullah, these people who are involved in the so-called reconciliation efforts and so on, either these people or some of their representatives never found an entry in the government. And we also, because I'm saying this because You see, in ethnically diverse societies, one of the ways by which we try to contain conflict about a certain degree of peace at the macro level is through power sharing arrangements. In political science, you call it consociationalism. Okay. Now, this has not happened because you see 30 out of the 33 figures in senior positions, they are all coming from the Pashtun stock. And Pashtun stock, in terms of its size in the population of Afghanistan, is around, it ranges between 40 and 45% only. And some Taliban leaders say that this power sharing as a kind of right on the part of individual groups will not be recognized in Islam. Instead, in Islam, a leader decides to give up some of his power and then devolve it to others. But then that need not be on a what you call ethnic, racial, or based on proportional the size of the population or anything like that. So this is un-Islamic according to them, and it's also un-Islamic on the part of any group to demand power as a right. If power comes to you because of the generosity of someone, you have to take it, and that's all. Now, we know that this regime is facing numerous challenges. Challenges from within are also there. Particularly from the remnants of the Islamic State, local branch of the Islamic State, and they were responsible recently for the blast in and around the Kabul airport and all that. The Afghan government, you will see that both under the Karzai administration as well as the Ghani administration, they made some effort to get the Taliban to sit down and talk. But unfortunately, the Taliban never recognized these governments. They saw them as just puppets of the United States. So in other words, they were more willing to engage with the United States than any of these governments. So in other words, they never recognized the legitimacy of the Karzai administration as well as the Ghani administration. And in many so-called, say for example, in 2001, there was some kind of a deal, I think it was in Paris, and Taliban was left out completely. And in 2003-4, during that period, Karzai had actually broached the subject that we should somehow engage the Taliban. But at that time, the United States was, very keen that Taliban should not in any way be involved. So you see, working, for the cause of peace in a sustainable way demands that we try to engage with people at the right moment. The moment, if in the, say for example, in 2003 or 4, if Taliban was involved in some kind of negotiations and if they were brought in, now we need to realize that that was a period when Taliban was at its most disadvantaged position. So engaging with such parties at that point in time would have yielded much better results now. But this peace process actually started rather late. After 2014 and so on, the United States has not been involved in the forefront of the fight against Taliban, leaving it to the Afghan forces to take care of that. So what happened was, when the time for negotiations came, they were actually negotiating from a position of strength. Now, in typical negotiation, we have, you talk about three kinds of positions. You have the hard approach, you have the soft approach, you also have the principled approach. Even if you take a principled approach, that your legitimate interests will be protected. Now, the Taliban actually resorts to a kind of hard approach. They would not understand the so-called rational choice or making compromises. Start with, maybe start on a high pitch, but then as negotiations proceed, you come down and then reach a midpoint where you actually strike a deal. These kind of ideas don't work with the Taliban. And they are also a little bit elusive about many of their goals. You have to state outright what your goals are if real negotiations need to take place. So this is also one of the problems. So for outside forces to engage with Taliban, which is not so negotiation friendly. Now, this is something which actually prevents the possibility of persuading Taliban to create a more inclusive government, recognize certain basic rights, and allow women and other groups to, pursue careers as well as get themselves educated and get into various services and so on. The Taliban leadership at the moment, as far as I understand, is trying to engage in a kind of double talk. On the one hand, they say that we are going to be different. We are going to engage with other countries. We need your support. And women's education is not going to suffer just because we are in power. We will try to accommodate as many people as possible. Now, this is the kind of image that at least a few Talibani spokespersons are, giving out to the outside world. But on the other hand, there is also another kind of message going for internal consumption of the Talibanis, that, we are going to establish an Islamic emirate in its true sense. So they are actually currently, how they bridge this and then how they are able to convince their own constituents that we have to be a little bit forward looking. We have to accommodate various interests, and we have to work with people with certain differences on certain minimalist goals, maybe the implementation of, an Islamic state and all that. Many people would be willing to do that. You know that in Afghanistan, there's a world of difference between the rural people and the urban people. The rural people are more religious, and they look upon the urban centers as places where they engage in un-Islamic practices. And it is the rural hinterland which actually provides support to the Talibanis. Although many people in the rural areas are not Taliban supporters or Taliban fighters, they are able to relate to the Talibanis, given the fact that religiosity and all those kinds of things are much more rooted in those regions. And interestingly, I also think that Afghanistan is one country which actually wants to claim itself as representing the purest of Islam. And many would wonder that, and they themselves would sometimes say that Prophet Muhammad, it was a mistake, it was somehow a mistake that Prophet Muhammad was born in Saudi Arabia, and then he had to flee from Mecca to Medina and all. Whereas if he had been born in Afghanistan, we would have welcomed him, and such troubles and all those would not have been there. So a kind of highly purist kind of Islam is seen by most of these people as the way in which they try to identify, to make their identity, the country's identity. So in these situations, I just want to conclude by saying that in situations like this, when we actually try to engage in peace-related work, we may have to set aside many of our received ideas on conflict resolution and conflict transformation and all those kinds of stuff. We have to work with maybe local ways of doing disputes and handling disputes and all that. It has to be rooted in the local culture and all that. So how this is possible? Well, it's not the international actors who can think about it. International actors can provide maybe external support in terms of maybe monetary support, perhaps also good offices in the form of neutral venues where these people can meet and talk and all that. Now, if you look at the the rest of the world, you'll see that no country wants that a radical group should come and occupy power in Afghanistan, in Kabul, and control the regime from there. China has its reservations about such groups. Russia has. India has also a lot of concerns. And although India at the highest level, India does not deal with the Taliban, and there's a lot of opposition in the country and so on. I understand that at the lower level, maybe at the bureaucratic level, we have kept some lines of communication open to Taliban. And I think that it's a useful strategy, because you know that in international relations, when we talk about sustainable peace, just peace, and so on, there's one kind of discourse. But then we also have to think about peace that can be achieved at a minimal level, so that life can go on. So we have to engage with these groups so that in our neighborhood, in Kashmir and so on, they do not create problems. So, so there are a lot of countries which do not want that Afghanistan should become again another haven for these terrorists. I also want to end this by saying that no country can think that we are actually the people and bearers of peace, and our ideas can best, are the best for people living in other parts of the world. And we have found that time and again these things have failed. Now, if you look at the United States intervention, for example, if United States had intervened and left the country, maybe after a while, I think it would not have, less damage would have happened. You see, after the United States came in, but if you look at the external scenario, we see the emergence of IS. Now it has declined, but splinter groups are still, functioning. And Al-Qaeda supported or Al-Qaeda variants like Al-Shabaab in the in Kenya, as well as what is that country? Okay, just below Ethiopia. Okay, I'll leave it. Al-Shabaab. Then you have also Boko Haram in West Africa. So in East Africa, you have Al-Shabaab, and West Africa, you have Boko Haram. Then you have the IS. Now you have the IS, local IS of Afghanistan. So there has been a spread of terrorism as a result of the intervention, instead of reducing, instead of physically eliminating terrorism. And this, I believe, is based on the principle that people believe that fighting and dying for a just, what they believe to be a just cause is better than finding ways and means by which we try to avoid these conflicts through negotiation, dialogue, and compromise. So I believe that, therefore, that international community should use resources within Afghanistan to start a process by which the Afghans engage in a sort of self-determination and find their way. As I said earlier, if the Talibanis decide to be exclusive as they used to be in the past, and grossly violate human rights, and allow the re-emergence of the very same values that they represented during that period, then we are going to witness instability in the region. So these are some of the thoughts that I want to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor John, for your excellent reflections on prospects for peace in the Taliban regime or Taliban era. We will be taking up the questions just now or after the presentation of Professor Mark Linley. John?
We can club it.
I'm willing to talk now. No.
Okay. Then I will give a very brief introduction about Dr. Mark Lindley. It is a very difficult task to introduce Professor Mark Lindley because of his contribution in various fields. He is a noted musicologist. He is a Gandhian scholar, substantially contributed to Gandhian economics, especially of Kumarappa. In a sense, he is a historian of modern India. Also, it is very difficult whether we should introduce him as a professor who taught in American universities or a professor who is from America who substantially taught in different parts of this country. He taught at prestigious institutions like Columbia University, City University of New York, Washington University, University of London, Oxford University, and so on. The list is unending. He has also worked a substantial time in Istanbul also, like India. In India, he is attached to a number of premier institutions, starting from the University of Kerala, University of Hyderabad, and many other universities where he delivered innumerable lectures or served as a visiting professor. For example, prestigious institutions like Gujarat Vidyapith, Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Central University of Gujarat. He was also attached to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Marathwada University. At present, he is focusing in the Mahatma Gandhi Mission University as a professor of eminence, focusing on areas of economics, Gandhian thought, Western classical music, and so on. It is our fortunate to have Professor Mark Lindley in our midst, who will look upon Afghan war as an episode in the cultural history of USA from the perspective of global peace. With this brief introduction, now I request Professor Mark Lindley to share his views. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And greetings to everyone. I am an old man, and so I have had these many associations. It was a great pleasure, in a way, for me to hear John Mulakatu's talk, because I read the best American and European newspapers, and the people who write about Afghanistan for those very prestigious newspapers, they don't know as much about Afghanistan as I just heard in this talk. And so I felt I was learning a lot, and I would like to learn more from this man. He showed me that Afghanistan has been changing during all this time. During this time that the Americans have been talking about how their soldiers were doing, and the money and the victory and the defeat and the hopes to win and blah, 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 blah. The country was changing in many ways. And I had the feeling that he knew that. I don't think there are 10 people in the American government who know as much about that as he does. It is tragic. And I want to talk about this Afghan episode in American history as a part of a tragedy in American history. That was the first thought I had. And then I will come to a couple of suggestions for what to do now, from an American point of view, as well as from the point of view of someone here in India and someone interested in Mahatma Gandhi and his great ideas. The United States became a leader in the growth of capitalist affluence. That terrific affluence began to pick up in the US in the 1920s with the assembly line, mass production, all that kind of thing. And so this became a model for the world. Maybe half of you have a cousin or an uncle or a son or a nephew who's over in the United States because that's where the prosperity is, yes? That started, roughly speaking, 100 years ago. There had been people going there before, but not because it was so prosperous, rather because there was a lot of land before. And then the US had two great triumphs in world politics after the First World War. The First World War was won by the British side because of contributions from India and the United States, contributions of cannon fodder, of manpower. And the American contribution toward the end of the war was decisive in ending the stalemate in the First World War. India expected some great things after the First World War, and they did not come. India was disappointed by the British failure to step forward in the direction of dominion status right after the First World War. And so that was a disappointment for India. But the United States felt triumphant after the First World War, and the United States government was instrumental in designing the settlement at the end of the First World War, but they didn't get their way. It was a very harsh settlement. Anyway, we felt we were very big. And then came the second. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. And then because of the bad settlement, excuse me? Yes, because of the bad settlement after the First World War and the consequences of the Depression and so on, came the fascism and the Second World War. And this time it was American industry that was absolutely decisive, leading down in many ways more ships, more airplanes, more tanks, and at the end, the atom bomb that brought Japan to its knees at the end. America won the Second World War, and this was a great triumph. And meanwhile, the prosperity after the Second World War, this was during my teens, was absolutely wonderful in the United States. Yes, the waste, the prosperity, the affluence, and we became the exceptional country. We would have foreign aid to save the whole world, teach the whole world to be like us. This was in President Truman's Point 4 program in 1948. We would save the world with our foreign aid, teach the world to be affluent, eliminate poverty, sort of like what Indira Gandhi said later on in India. Yes, and show the rest of the world how to live, the American way of life. Our democracy was better, and our automobiles were better, and our way of life was better. That was pride before a fall. And the fall began big time in Vietnam. We picked up the fag end of France's colonial war in Vietnam, and we fought a completely useless war, destructive, incredibly destructive, which we lost in Vietnam. That was the first chapter of the tragedy. Unfortunately, we won another war, the Iraq War, which was so brilliantly fought by the American military against a rather stupid general in Iraq. And we got our pride back, and we went into Afghanistan. So this Afghanistan victory of the Taliban, from the American point of view, is just another decisive step in the tragic results of the American exceptionalism and pride coming from our great victories after the First and Second World War, and then in Iraq. So this is the situation from the US. Now, coupled with the American fate in this sense, and how America will pull out of this sense of defeat, we have a defeat now in America. Yes, like Germany had after each of the world wars. We have lost, and we know we've lost. How will we pull out of that cultural, psychological depression? That remains to be seen. But it is not just a depression for the US, it's a depression for the American way of life. It's a depression for the kind of capitalism that is causing global warming, that is causing using up all the ores in the earth. We don't have that much copper left to make electric wires from. All of these problems are coming from the heedless, thoughtless overexploitation of the earth. The Green Revolution was wonderful for a couple of years. Now we're beginning to see the downside of the Green Revolution. We used up too much. And so not just for the United States, but for the whole prosperous way of life brought in by industrial capitalism. This is a Gandhian point. That whole prosperous way of life has to be questioned now, because the future is going to be very different from the past. So when the United Nations says recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world, yes, it is very important to look for an equitable.
Can someone mute them?
Okay, it is very important to seek an equitable and sustainable world, but that will not be achieved by recovering to go back to what was the American ideal before. Yes, this is my point of view from this is what the Americans have to learn, and everyone else, I believe, should learn this, who looks to the American way of life as the model for the world. There is something wrong with the American way of life. Not everything, but some things. These things have to be sorted out. Yes, not only in America, but in other countries that have looked to America with a kind of cultural colonialism. We will copy the Americans. We will bring their kind of technology here, their kind of government here. Well, it has to be different in different cultures. And I think that John Mulakatu was bringing out this point well in regard to Afghanistan. The United States should not have tried to tell the people of Afghanistan how to run their affairs in Afghanistan. But that was a habit that we got into at a certain point. We would tell the rest of the world how to do human rights. We knew and they didn't know. Well, you know, the Chinese say the basic human right is the right to get out of poverty. And they're working on that, and they don't worry about the other human rights very much. And we worry about some of the others, but we don't worry so much about getting out of poverty. There has to be room for each country to sort out, in terms of what is feasible culturally in that country, its choice of how it's going to balance the different kinds of human rights. I think that outside forces should try to tell the Taliban, now that they are going to govern Afghanistan, should negotiate with them about what they do outside of Afghanistan, but should not try to tell them what to do in Afghanistan. Let them, this is my first conclusion, let them work out with friendly chat, but without any pressure or incentives from outside people, what to do inside their government. Now, what they do on other people's turf, and other people's government is another issue. There's an issue where we have reason to have dialogue. Now, I want to say two other things. One is there were two wonderful ideals mentioned by John Mulakatu during his talk. One was the ideal of inclusive government, and the other was the ideal of a principled approach. Now, these are wonderful ideals, but when it comes to thinking about the possibility of realizing them, there has to be a realistic assessment of what are the emotional residues of all those violent conflicts. There has to be a Gandhian sense of how to deal with the emotional residues of all those conflicts if you're going to become ready to take a principled approach and to have some kind of inclusive government. There has to be, it's not enough to talk about principles. You have to deal with the emotions of that have been stirred up by all this violence that took place. Now, in the case of India and England, it was absolutely wonderful. Nobody in England hates India for getting out, and a lot of Indians don't hate England. So Gandhi gave a gift to the British and to the Western world in this way. We have to try to, from outside of, set an example in India of deal these problems. Now, I wanted to deal with one other issue here. This is a paradox, a very troubling paradox. John Mulakatu mentioned the ideal of minimizing the suffering. We're going to minimize the suffering in other countries as well as ours. Yes, this was an important feature of American military thinking after the wars in Vietnam and in Korea. In the War of Korea, the destruction was horrendous, and in Vietnam as well. And after that happened, the American military decided to humanize warfare. And an example of humanization of warfare is to use the drones rather than send a lot of soldiers in. Yes, don't destroy so much land. Don't drop these poison chemicals all over the forest like we did in Cambodia and Vietnam. Don't destroy or try to destroy the whole city, all this kind of thing. We would humanize by refinement of technique. Yes, and that effort to humanize the war came together with two packages. Yes, one was we would do nation building in other nations where we don't know the culture, we don't know the language, we don't know what the rural people are thinking about the city people in that country. Yes, we're ignorant, and we're going to tell them what to do, and we allow ourselves to do that because we say that our use of force is humanistic. Yeah. This is a paradoxical idea. Now, along with those two came the third idea in the so-called war against terror. And that is the idea that that war would go on forever. We would not have a short war against terror like we thought we were going to have in Vietnam and in Korea. Yeah, it would not be a 5-year war like the Second World War. No, it would be a 20, 30, 40, 50-year war. We would go on fighting terror forever with our humanistic military means. This combination of ideas that we're killing less people because we're aiming the drones more efficiently, and then we apologize when we kill a family by mistake or bomb a wedding by mistake, but still we're being more humanistic than sending in all our atomic bombs and all that kind of thing. Humanistic war forever. This is a terrible paradox. Yeah. And so my talk is really a set of commentaries on what I believe was the very smart talk given before me by John Mulakatu. I think that I just want to conclude by saying that when we speak of recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world, I think we must understand that recovering doesn't mean going back to some good situation we had before. I think that the environmental issues, in addition to the political issues, and the environmental issues include all this emigration that's taking place. That problem will not be solved. There will be massive immigration all over the world, here and there. That is due to environmental causes, to global warming, to people starving in a certain land. They're going to go to another land where they hope not to starve. These problems cannot be solved by going back, recovering in the sense of getting back to how nice it was before. We have to go forward to deal with the problems that, and to help our children and grandchildren. I'm 80 some years old. Help those people deal with the problems that will be different. We must not think, I believe, of recovering as going back, getting back to the big domestic, gross domestic product. Yes, we must think of recovering as going forward to some kind of solution to these problems that are coming down the highway big time now for our children and grandchildren. I hope I have not spoken too long. Thank you so much for your attention. It is a great honor to have been invited to contribute. Thank you.
Sibi sir. Professor Sibi.
Brought out very significant observation regarding the peace prospects in the Taliban era. Now I request all the participants to share their observations, comments, or any questions to the speakers of this day, Professor John Chaladure, Professor Mullikat Stephen John, Professor Mark Lindley. Thank you.
Any questions?
Spoke about Gandhi. Another sir. Can you hear me? Hello, Mr. Martin.
A little louder.
Yeah, spoke.
Ashok Chaudhary.
We sprawled. We spoke about so many different things.
I think no questions, Professor Sibi sir, we can go ahead.
This is Rajendra. I am Rajendra Deshpande from Central University of Gujarat Research. Can I ask the question?
Yeah, please, sir.
Yeah. Thank you for making me part of this session. The Professor John from Central University of Kerala and both the speakers and Mark Lindley have given a very, very elaborative narratives of Afghanistan. As Professor John has mentioned, the initiative has to be localized. And this is very true in all the peace initiatives. But if you find, since the death of Mahatma Gandhi, you will find the peace, local initiatives of peace in Afghanistan and in many other countries have not led to the desired conclusion. What may be the cause of such failures and what corrective actions do you think is necessary? Thank you.
Shall I answer that? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Deshpande, for that question. Well, it shows that they have the traditional jirga, and they call it sometimes loy jirga and a few things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So you see, in every place, every society, particularly in Asian societies, we have local traditional ways of dispute resolution. What happens is that when elements of modernity come in, actually some of these processes get a little bit complicated. So they take a little more time to deliver results. But then I don't think that the typical, say, Western conflict resolution ideas built on rational choice assumptions, where you are a very rational person and then you are able to think in terms of cost and benefits will work in situations like this. We have to allow the very same processes to maybe to be strengthened, and then if funding and all those things are available, we should try to strengthen those elements. And we should also keep, as far as possible, keep ourselves aloof by saying that we can provide you expertise and all that. Forget about your expertise. And even in Western, conflict resolution circles, there has been a realization of late, particularly in the last 20 years, that inside of an outsider neutral mediator, it's better to have an insider partial mediator. Now, this is particularly found in, South American, Latin American settings in some conflicts by people like Ledrak and all that. So it's not a very straightforward answer, but then these are some of my thoughts relating to that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And a lot of social media posts are there now. Why Greta is not commenting? Why Malala is not commenting? Why they are silent? And so, does it indicate that people want that peace-loving Islams and Islamic countries should intervene in this?
I could just make one little suggestion here. I think the women want the peace more than the men do.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And but in different cultures, women have different ways of letting their wishes be known. Everything has to be done in a way that is somehow going to be effective in that culture with that religion and that kind of political situation, I would say. We shouldn't just walk into someplace and say, we're going to tell you how to do
it. Right.
Can I ask a question, please?
Please.
Yeah, please.
Hello.
Yes. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. You introduce yourself and go ahead.
I'm Dr. Shobha Shinde from North Maharashtra University, Jalgaon. Sir, there has been, I'm sorry I joined in late, but whatever I heard was very illuminating. Sir, there had been a lot of debate at the time in the media and on different channels that America left Afghanistan very abruptly without making the necessary preparations for their exit. And they left the Afghans very vulnerable to the Taliban power. So what is the exact interpretation of American withdrawal from Afghanistan? Please.
Is this addressed to me?
Yes, sir. You are the expert on America.
Well, there were two factors for the fact that our withdrawal, when we decided to make it, was done ineptly, done in a quick, too precipitously. Two reasons. One was until this year, last year, we had a crazy president. I mean, Donald Trump. Yes. And he had always wisely said that we shouldn't have gone into Afghanistan. That was part of his position before he was a candidate for president and during the campaign. He had always said that. Towards the end of his presidency, actually at a time when his own top general thought that he was going crazy, This has just come out in the last couple of days. He then negotiated with the Taliban and setting a date for a very quick withdrawal. He wanted to impose his will on the situation. This is a man who has never done anything competently. So on the one hand, we have the problem of a really crazy and inept president. That was the first reason, Mr. Trump. Then we got a president who's very savvy in politics, very good at making compromises, at getting good advice, and not taking any nonsense. Yes, but the problem with him was that the Afghan government army, which we had equipped with vast amounts of airplanes and tanks and jeeps and fantastic kinds of guns and bazookas and everything, they dropped it all. They didn't use it at all. They surrendered it here and there immediately to the Taliban. And the Taliban were very good at military things. They picked up that equipment and they wiped us out of the town within a week. Yeah. So the second was that we had put all this military equipment there. And the money, the people we were paying fantastic amounts of money to, of course, it was all dripped down. By the time you got to the bottom, it was only enough to make the bottom people pretty rich, where the upper people were stinking corrupt. Anyway, they all dropped the equipment immediately and gave it to the Taliban. And that's why we had to withdraw, contrary to the predictions of all our military, all our CIA. They said that we could hang on, that the Afghan Western supported government could hang on for several months. That was the idea, that this would take longer. But the military equipment went over in a matter of days to the other side. And that was the second reason for the quick retreat. Now, for the United States, that is a traumatic political event because it evokes the last days of the Vietnamese War, when there were helicopters on top of the American embassy and so on. So there was a replay of this humiliation. However, that replay is not quite as bad as it had been in Vietnam, because the CIA is still negotiating with the Taliban. And if you read the American newspapers, you know that every day or two, another full load of helicopter people and another full plane load of people come out of Afghanistan. The Taliban is letting some people get out. So it's not really quite as bad as it was in Vietnam. But the reason for the speed is there are two reasons. Mr. Trump's absolute ineptitude. He didn't use any of his diplomats, no negotiating, whatever. He just said, we're going to get out right away. This was in the last days of his presidency, at the very same time that he was planning the storming of the Capitol that took place on January 6th. Yeah, he was president until January 20th. Yeah, so this was early January, he set this date. And the second reason was that the Taliban picked up all the military equipment and they used it very effectively we were lucky to be able to get a few flights out of the airport. Yeah, the two reasons for the quickness. It was not it was on the one hand, a crazy president. On the other hand, the money, the soldiers who were being soldiers for the money, yes, just didn't fight. And this was a great surprise to our president. The CIA told him they would fight for a few months more. Yeah. I hope that's an adequate answer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, there's a small point which I want to add
Please.
to what Professor Mark has said. That is, one problem with the way in which the Afghan army was trained, is again a typical American model training. You see, you have them marching and then accompanied by the fighter aircrafts, from the sky. So this is a typical model which won't work in Afghanistan, where you have to actually teach people how to engage in guerrilla warfare.
Yep.
That's the kind of warfare which Taliban engages in. So that's also one of the reasons why the Afghan army found themselves, wanting. And also, many of those who were recruited into the army, they were actually ghost soldiers, which means they were not soldiers in the real sense. They are on the rolls, but then their salaries and so on are appropriated by some big, local chiefs and the corruption issue. See, so so this also was a major factor for the army getting into a situation of disarray. Yeah.
Our people there didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't know the language. They didn't know the culture. Very similar to what had happened in Vietnam. Yeah. They just didn't know what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, but Vietnam came out of the shadows of the war very successfully. But when will Afghanistan emerge from the shadow of this betrayal? Can we call it betrayal at all?
I did not understand. Can you put your question a little more slowly?
Okay. Yes, please. See, sir, I had in mind that Vietnam, after the Americans left Vietnam, Vietnam has emerged as a very strong nation, especially South Vietnam, leaving out North Vietnam. So do we have some hope for Afghanistan to recover from the shock?
That's an interesting question, a really interesting question. It's different. The two cases are different. The leader of North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, yes?
Yeah.
He had lived in Paris for quite a while. He was a great admirer of Thomas Jefferson. The constitution that he designed for North Vietnam was based on the American Constitution of the 1780s, written by Thomas Jefferson. He was a fairly enlightened political thinker with a lot of background in Western historical political culture. Yeah. So that is, and of course, there had been a lot of French colonial education in Vietnam. So part of the reason for the fact that Vietnam hasn't done so very badly, it has to do with that. Now, the Taliban are a different kettle of fish. They're very different. They are Muslims. And I was interested in, I have lived in Turkey, in Istanbul, and I have traveled to some villages in Turkey. There's the similar difference between the country folks and the city folks in Turkey. Yes, the country folks know what good Islam is, right? You're in a village and someone turns up at your door and says, Allah sent me, and you give them hospitality, no question about it. Yep. But in the city, they have different ways and so on. So the country people, they think the city girls are not proper. No, the way they're dressing is not right. Yeah, and so they want to go back to the true Islamic way, and so on and so forth. So when John Mulakatu mentioned that about Afghanistan, that resonated with what I know about Turkey. So Turkish government is rather somewhat fundamentalist Islamic, and it gets its support from the peasants, you see, with some from the cities, but mainly from the countryside. So the two situations are different. Now, I think that the urban culture in Afghanistan is probably much less highly developed on the whole than it is in Turkey with Istanbul and Ankara and one or two other cities. So how these people are going to learn how to govern in terms of what is acceptable and feasible in their country is a very interesting question. Yeah, the Vietnamese have done not so badly. Let's hope that the Taliban can figure out a decent way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for all for the lively discussion, and thanks for the resource person for responding to the observations and comments made by the participants. Now we are entering into the final part of this webinar.
Dr. Sivi.
Yes.
Dr. Sivi, there is a customary ritual. Can we request all the participants to switch on their video that we can document it? Just for a minute before you wind up. I'm sorry I intervened. If the social media manager can take a screenshot. and share with others, it will be better.
May I just add one point to what I said a moment ago? Yes? I've just been thinking here. I want to add something I said ago. We must not think of the Taliban as an absolutely monolithic group of people. There are a bunch of different people at that leadership, and they're having arguments. Yes, this is interesting. Yes. Just the other day, one of the big leaders left in a huff, went away from sitting down with the other leaders of the Taliban. There's a lot of sorting out to be done within the Taliban as to how they're going to govern. I think we should realize that. We shouldn't just think of the Taliban as of a bunch of identical people whom we tag as Taliban. That's it. No, they're human beings. Yeah. Thank you.
It's good that they don't use guns to resolve their problems.
We hope.
That is something very encouraging.
Well, every government uses guns. Every government uses guns. Yes. In the 21st century, there's no such thing practically. Maybe very rare to have a government without guns in the 21st century. It's how you use them that counts. The difference between a police force and an army is critical. Critical. Pardon me for, yeah. So, John, I'm sorry, you had a video to show here? We are going to show a video.
No, I think he only wanted a screenshot of the number of people who participated. He just wanted to record the faces. So that's all.
Super.
Dr. Harish,
Yes, sir.
please take the screenshot
Yeah, sure,
of the participants for our record.
Some sort of cheese or something.
You look wonderful, Mark. I mentioned that you look wonderful, Mark, without your headphone and everything.
We are glad that we have quite a few learned friends join. I recognize the presence of Dr. George Palamatam from New York, Advocate Lubna from Dhaka, Dr. D. Castillo from Manchester, Roshan Kublalji from South Africa, Durban, and quite a few friends. I see Reverend Godson Samuel, Professor Pushpa Bhatiani, Dr. Sunil, Professor Neelu Khosla, Netrapal Singhji, and quite a few, Rajendra Ji from Gandhinagar, quite a few friends who responded. Thank you very much for being part of us. I also see the Saroja Ji from Yavatmal. Thank you very much. Oh yes, we have Dr. Aniket Joshi, Management Professor. Thank you very much. I also recognize the presence of the Dean of School of Humanities and Social Sciences of Mahatma Gandhi Mission University, Dr. Rekha Sherke, who has been all through with us in organizing this program. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Sibi sir, please. Just move on.
Yeah.
You can take over.
I hope you have taken the screenshot.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Then we will proceed to the concluding part of it. As rightly pointed out by Professor John, we have a lot of dignitaries from different walks of life, from academics, from activists, eminent professors, teachers, including the Dean of Mahatma Gandhi Institute, Mahatma Gandhi Mission University, Dr. Rekha Shalke and others. Now we are entering into the last part of it. Now I request Dr. Harish Kumara, Executive Director, Center for Education, Environment and Community, to address the audience by way of concluding remarks and express our deep sense of gratitude to all participants who have joined in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor CBK Joseph, sir, for this wonderful opportunity. And also, I'm glad to be with the group. Yeah. Well,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sabianna and John.
Just
John,
I mean, officially, let me honor or let me profuse word of thanks. So that please wait for a couple of minutes so that it will be officially we will be winding up. Thank you so much for Professor CBK Joseph and on behalf of Sevagram Ashram Pratishthan Wardha, Maharashtra, Mahatma Gandhi Mission University Aurangabad, and Center for Gandhian Studies, Central University of Kerala. Today we have organized an interesting and very timely webinar, national webinar on International Day of Peace and a roundtable on Afghanistan and global peace. Before getting to concluding, before getting to word of thanks, I also have a responsibility of concluding remarks. Thanks for this opportunity, this golden opportunity. Yes, all our dignitaries and keynote speakers, Dr. John Chaladurai and Mulkati John sir, and Dr. Mark Lindley has beautifully explained. We got three different dimensions. One is the regional dimensions. That was by John Chaladurai, who has explained about the local regional issues about peace, and Mulkati John sir has explained about the differences between Eastern and Western conflict resolution, and Mark Lindley has expertise in Western, especially about American politics and diplomacy. Before getting to that, as sir has mentioned, that war is much easier than peace. Yes, we know that we are experiencing that day-to-day life. Before getting to that, I would like to bring your kind attention that we all talking about or speaking about international peace or international disparities. But is it also necessary for us to inquire about ourselves, about individual level peace? Just randomly, I was thinking that today we got delayed for 10 to 15 minutes to start this webinar. How many of you are upset, frustrated, disappointed, but angry about today's program? Got delayed for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Is it related to a sort of peace, or is it not? Day-to-day life, we are messing up our life in one or the other way with our own people or known people, known network. Yes, of course, we also respect that international peace. Yes, we'll move ahead. But before reaching or before getting into that level, let us also think about bringing peace, joy, and very truthful relationship between ourselves at an individual level, societal level, regional level, state level, national, then let us move on to international level. This is my sort of recommendation or a suggestion. And also, as we say, small is beautiful. We have to start with small, one-to-one relationship. Today, we are losing that, as ma'am mentioned about it's one of social media and other media, which they are not, giving prominence or, some news or whatever the news which are coming. We are blindly believing that, not we, in the sense, youngsters, I call it as a WhatsApp university and Facebook university is dominating today. Whether we accept or not, people blindly accepting, forwarding. That is a really very problematic situation which we are having today in our country. Blindly, people are forwarding, blindly, people are taking for granted and provoking, promoting all sort of disputes within the society, be it communal, be it language, be it interstate, be it international. So it is our responsibility as a family. We have to stand together on this occasion of International Day of Peace. Let us unite together, both emotionally as well as practically. Can we take forward? And Gandhi is a person we always take his path. As John sir has mentioned about conflict resolution between Eastern and Western. Yes, there's a huge difference between Eastern and Western conflict resolution. We Eastern, especially in Indian traditions or Indian culture, we always believe in that. Forget about past. Let us move ahead. We never get back to past. Okay, whatever happened. So it happened, it happened. Let us move on. Nyaya, Niti, Dharma, as per Indian tradition, is something different from what now some people are promoting their propaganda as a Dharma, as a Nyaya, or as a justice and a Nyaya is something different. Niti and suggestion is something different. With this, I thank all the dignitaries, especially for today's the speech was on today's theme of International Day of Peace 2021 by Dr. John Chaladurai, Professor and Head Department of Gandhian Studies, MGM University, Aurangabad. Thank you so much, sir. I express my gratitude on behalf of organizers. You brought all regional level issues, and I also express my special thanks to Mulakattu John, Professor of Political Science and Director, Center for Gandhian Studies, Central University, Kerala, and Chief Editor, Gandhi Mark, New Delhi, for bringing out a new dimension about conflict resolution, Eastern and Western issues. And I also express my thanks to Mark Lindley, Professor of Eminence, MGM University, Aurangabad, who was an eminent speaker and also experienced in Western politics, as well as he has beautifully explained about USA's stand in Afghanistan issues, the current conflicts. With that, I also express thanks to Professor CBK Joseph, Director, Sri Jamandal Bajaj Memorial Library and Research Center, Sevagram Ashram Pratishthan, who is a backbone for all the Gandhian initiatives, programs, happening or conducting in India. Thank you so much, sir. I also personally express that. Thank you so much. And as CB sir and Dr. John sir has mentioned that many popular names or popular personalities are with us today. All the academicians, Gandhian followers, Gandhian activists, all are with us today. Thank you so much to one and all for our participants. And with this, I am also, there is one small announcement. We have another seminar. Probably you might have aware about it. We have a year-long webinar series on the occasion of 75th Independence Day. So next upcoming webinar is on 26th September 2021, Sunday, 7 p.m. We'll be sharing invitation. Once again, thank you so much, one and all. Let's wind up today's session.
Thank you very much. Friend,
Thank you,
there is a
Dr.
small
Harish Kumar.
announcement. My voice is echoing. I request Dr. CB to announce the two other program that is coming before 26th. I request Dr. CB.
It will be our pleasure to introduce and welcome all of you for the upcoming programs which we organize on the occasion of 75th anniversary of Indian independence. Tomorrow, we will be having a national webinar coinciding with the centenary year of loincloth revolution of Mahatma Gandhi. And on 24th, we have another webinar, Pact and Impact, Gandhi Ambedkar Accord. Then we will be having the evaluation of the paper writing competition. They will be presented at a webinar on 29th and 30th. And the selected participants will be getting an opportunity to present their papers on October 2nd national webinar. As Dr. Harish Kumar has rightly pointed out, we are also having a webinar on 26th as a part of Time Demands Gandhi webinar series for an year. Before we conclude, I have to thank Dr. Harish Kumar because it was on my suggestion he started the webinar series, starting with the International Day of Peace. And during the course of more than a year, we have organized innumerable webinars. I'm grateful to all the organizers and speakers for their contribution, support, but at the same time, we have to admit the fact that today we have faced some technical issues. In spite of an experienced hand like Dr. Harish Kumar, he has been organizing webinars more than a year through Zoom platform. My sincere apologies to all those who could not attend. We have recorded this session and it will be made available. I have received a number of messages that they could not join it. We'll be sharing recordings with all of them.